Hello friends, it's funkyplaybrothers, and please may I subscribe to our YouTube. And today we're reading Chapter 2 of an original novel, Piggy Hunt by Terrance, Crawford, Scholastic. And I forgot everything that happened in Chapter 1 over the course of 1 week. Chapter 2. The trek to the nearest metro station did not take the corps of adventurers long. Like any major city worth its salt, Lucella had invested heavily in public transit. The trains had long since been automated, which meant that they came both frequently and on time. The fearless, for some, trapezed quickly down the stairs into the metro station. The foggy, overcast skies of Lucella giving way to the dim, buzzing overhead lights of the subway. Ben and Ollie ducked underneath in turnstiles that barred entry into the station, while Badgie hopped over them, opening the emergency door for Billy, whose massively sized almost guaranteed that he could not use the regular entrance. An alarm rang lazily. Almost to no one in particular, fair evasion was a crime, but a boundlessly cool one with no real victims and whose conquests there was no around to enforce. Ben felt his shoulders drop, relaxing just a little bit as they entered the underground station. Over the course of his adventures, Ben had become no stranger to roaming the island of Lucella on foot, but now that they had a cure for the illness, reliable transportation had quickly become paramount to their needs. This meant that the half dozen or so metro stations peppered across the island had been the first locations cleared out by Ben, his friends, and his combined might of the Silver Paw. Ben looked overhead at the dimly illuminated sign that displayed the upcoming subway arrivals and departures. According to the train schedule, the next train they could take to the safe place would be there in fewer than 5 minutes. Ben took a seat. The rigid wooden benches provided by the metro station were not intended for comfort or relief, instead seemingly only there by requirement. The laminated wood had begun to splinter and crack from months without upkeep, and pieces from the bench jutted out as weird angles, ostensibly to keep people from using them as a place to sleep. Ben kicked his feet up anyway, stretching his tired legs across the seats. His eyes drifted closed, and he rested his head against the begged tile wall of the station. He had learned a great deal of things since he had first set out on this journey, an important one being to rest when he could. He very rarely got the opportunity, and so it would take more than a little hostile architecture to keep him from catching a few minutes peace. Not much more, however. Ben discovered has a horrible smell tickling his nostrils, dragging his half-awake brain kicking and screaming back to the land of the unconscious. His eyes shut up, and as he heard a familiar click of Badgie's loading a fresh vial of the cure into his crossbow, the bad-tempered badger aimed down the sights of his weapon at a single solitary glowing red eye in the near distance. Ben scrambled to his feet, his already sore legs practically screaming for a break as his hands flew to his hip and the small handheld electroshock taser that he had kept on his person since it had been given to him. The red-eyed creature lurched forward. The buzzing and crackling overhead fluorescence exposed the creature to the light, and Ben had seen his fair share of these monsters, and if he never saw another, it would be far too soon. But never had the creature been more true than in this moment. While most of the infected creatures that the group came across were horrid in both smell and appearance, this one raised the bar in the most odious way. The infected creature towered over everyone except Billy, taking labored and rasping breaths as it stumbled toward the cord on legs as thick as tree trunks. Black veins spouted like plant roots from behind the thing's eyes, spreading across its face, whereas every creature that had run afoul of this up to this point had boasted the same dull pink skin, This one looked every more sickly, and the overhead lights casting dancing flickers hung shadows across the creature's sunken, sagging, sallow skin. The ghoulish beast's jaw went slack as it took another slow, measured step toward the heroes of Lucella, exposing a mouth filled with teeth in sharp shape of tombstones, each a different size and color, none of them looking as if they had seen recent dentistry work. One of its eyes bulging from its head, glowing a sickly orange and a red color in a way that was equal parts frightening and hauntingly familiar. The dark veins bloated its face, were zoomed on its arms, ending in twisted and descript limbs and the colors of black licorice. Limbs that seemed to have long since abandoned the idea of being attached to a living being. Ben tried breathing through his mouth to abate the smell, but it was to no avail. He had been able to get through the smell of the infected before. Sometimes he hardly even noticed anymore. But this was almost a solid, like wading through a stench with the consistency of pudding, of being force-fed old waffle batter of your grandma's favorite coat. Characteristically, Badgy was one of to break the silence. "Buddy, you smell like decay," Ben shouted, throwing out the first word that came to mind in the effort to protect all these young, innocent ears. His friends turned to him, confused by his outburst, but keeping their eyes trained on the monster in front of them. "Yeah, well, I don't know who DK is," Ollie piped up, "but this guy really is going through it. The train is coming," Billy warned, teetering back. Spindly fingers around the vial and pulled it out. Even Ben, rooted to the ground in fear, took a step back. He had seen Badgy take this same shot a dozen times. This same dosage had felled old lions and tigers, and if Ben's memory was not failing him, even a few bears. Oh my. The distorted monster dropped the container onto the ground in front of it, crushing it under a giant foot. The monster took another rasping breath. "Don't." Ben's blood ran cold. He had seen the infected people of Lucella do incredible things over the last couple months. He had seen them tear through buildings like they were made of cardboard. And he had seen them throw full-grown silver pot agents across the room like they were children toys. He had never heard one of the creatures speak. "That's new, right?" Ollie asked. "That's new to the canon." Ben felt the blood rush to his ears and his knees go weak, time slowing to a crawl. A low rattling sound filled the air, signaling the arrival of the train. The subway rumbled into the tunnel, bathing every one in its lights. Call it intuition, call it instinct, call it guts, call it whatever you wanted. But everything in Ben's body was screaming at him to run. Rooted to the ground in horror, Ben finally convinced his legs to listen to his brain. Ben began to step forward, not taking his eyes off the distorted creature in front of him. Ollie, Billy, and Badgy took his cue, each turning tail to run back to the end of the metro station tunnel. The train made an abrupt lurching stop, steel coloring doors sliding open with a dull whooshing sound. "Stand clear of the doors," came a garbled, automated voice from over the tiny speakers. The four hustled back into the corner of the train, though the distorted monster DK hadn't so much as blinked since it had spoken. The doors to the train whisked shut, and the train rumbled to life, wobbling forward along the track. Ben looked back through the scratched plexiglass window on the train. The monstrous creature faded into the nothingness of the dark metro station tunnel, a glowing red orb growing smaller and smaller. As the train rolled along the tracks, Ben's legs finally caught up with him and buckled. As he collapsed onto the cold plastic seat of the train, burying his head in his hands, 1,000 questions raced through his mind. Had the original infection mutated? Was this new strain resistant to the cure and that they hadn't only just discovered since when did the infected creatures talk? Though the one question that rang loudest in mind, what was that? Badgy shouted, and his scratchy voice echoed throughout the empty subway car as he gave voice to what everyone else was thinking. That wasn't no regular ghoul back there. Was that what was that? The silence that followed Badgie's maniac query seemed to be the best answer that anyone could give. Eventually, the adrenaline from their unorthodox encounter began to wear off. Billy fell victim to the lure of sleep first, his head laying heavily on the backpack Ben had taken from Officer Doggy. All that time ago, Billy's chest heaved in and out slowly as he snored deeply, seemingly too deep in slumber to hear the loud metal clanking of his barbell. As it rattled along the train car floor, Ollie yawned, stretching his arms over his head. It was not long before he, too, was fast asleep, his head propped up on Billy's massive legs. Even Badgie dropped, pacing the length of the subway car, muttering under his breath, and took a seat on one of the rigid plastic benches, still muttering under his breath. Ben held a hand over his chest, his heart still pounding and his breath still coming in rapid bursts. He took a few steady, measured breaths, trying to get his breathing under control. With each breath, Ben relaxed a little, feeling his blocky shoulders drop, his eyelids flutter and close as he drifted off to sleep. Ben could not remember the last time he had gotten a proper good night's sleep. Maybe it had been that first night in the Officer Doggy, but if that's the bar he was setting for himself, it was a low one to clear. Indeed, tonight would not be that night. After their encounter with the distorted monster in the metro station lobby, Ben wasn't exactly surprised as the rhythmic rocking motion of the underground trail lulled Ben to sleep. He found himself back on the train platform, the ghastly, distorted monster standing before him just as it had not hours ago. Ben looked around. Ollie, Badgie, and Billy were nowhere to be found. In his hands, Ben had held Badgie's crossbow, a set of 3 cure-loaded crossbows, and laid into the device. Ben triggered the firing mechanism, the first of the cure's vial launch in slow motion, until it landed squarely in the creature's chest. The syringe plunger activated and the monster creature fell down at Ben's feet. The version of Ben in his dream edged closer and closer to the unconscious creature until he stood over it. Looking down into his mismatched eyes, gravity shifted and Ben fell. The creature's eyes widened to swallow his whole body. He landed softly in an empty room, bathed entirely in the same eerie crimson glow that emitted from the eyes of the infected. Ben's eyes scanned his surroundings frantically, settling on his finger in black, looming over ever larger in the distance. The entity turned toward Ben and he jolted in his sleep as he felt a pang of recognition washing over him. Ben had hit several significant growth spurts over the summer, like many kids his age, but the entity still towered over him, casting a literal shadow over Ben as he moved toward him. This man was not the first time Ben had dreamed of this man, and he wasn't alone. Several residents of the safe place had reported seeing the same man in their dreams, each time spreading spite and whispering wickedness. No one knew who he truly was, only that he was effectively the boogeyman of Lucella. The entity appeared to people in their dreams when they were feeling low or when they were feeling vulnerable, and he tried to manipulate them to his own nefarious ends. Just what were those nefarious ends? Well, that remained to be seen. There was no mistake. The specter before Ben, his face was an uneven patchwork of gray stitching and his skin the texture of a burlap potato sack with a bun-shaped patch over one eye. The eye left exposed was large and gave off a reddish-orange glow as it bulged from the night side of his face. Ben felt the bottom fall out from his stomach when he realized why the distorted monster from the metro station's platform had looked so familiar to him. He seen the very same eye looking at him once before. The man stood out against the ghoulish crimson background of the dream. His dark purple blazer folded smartly over a light purple shirt with 3 gleaming black buttons. A red bow tie fit smartly around his neck. Lankly, slender legs and feet filled out a pair of purple pants and black shoes, and white gloves covering spindly fingers. A purple top hat sat upon the entity's head as if to complete his look. A long piece of black trim running along the bottom of his hat and encircled the middle, pinning together the milliner's worst nightmare, was a flower, a midnight black stamen that blossomed into the ring of orange petals. The petals had begun to die off. The withering plant began to blacken and curl at the ends, making the flower heavily resemble the eye of the entity and the distorted monster from the metro station platform. There were rumors that he had even inspired a following, a motley crew of outsiders and wackadoos who knelt at the altar of his creepiness. If the whisper floating around the safe place were to believe, and they often were, the group was using the symbol as a calling card. A single black orb, followed as a ring of crimson, then encircled again by a ring of black. They were calling it the Eye of Ice Insolence, because of course they were. Ben turned to face the fearsome being before him. Ben had heard him called a great many names. Some called him the Isolent One, with fears ringing every syllable of the name as they spoke. Ben prepared the entity a name had heard from one of the adults of the safe. It expects a dearth of knowledge from the man's origins without leaning into fear that so clearly craved. Ben had not been to his history class in quite some time, but if his memory was correct, those who tried to rule through fear were often not looked back upon too fondly. Some skipped the pleasantries altogether and called the man the Inquidus One. A white-gloved finger curled and uncurled, beckoning Ben forward in the realm of his dreams. Ben was not in full control of his body, so he did as the entity commanded. The distance between the two closing rapidly as Ben seemed to glide across the scarlet floor of the best-suited nightmare man. He came to an abrupt halt in front of the entity. That horrible glowing eye looked him over, probing and son of weakness and vulnerability that it could exploit. Finally, the Inquidus One opened his mouth to speak. "I've been fascinated by you for quite a while." The entity spoke slowly and deliberately, his voice like nails on a chalkboard echoing through Ben's head. "No, not fingernails, the kind you would find at a hardware store. You're unique, Ben." Ben wanted to argue but found no words. Leaving his mouth, he wasn't unique. He was just a young man in an open-world platform. The entity seemed to sense Ben's apprehension. "Don't be modest, young man. You're extraordinary, and you're not like the others." What did the Inquidus One mean by that? Again, the mysterious figure before him answered his question before he could ask it. "You're supposed to be infected. Do you remember when your journey began, Ben? Before the police station, before the forest, before the grocery store and all the labs. Think, Ben, think." The first place that Ben had explored in search of Ollie was his friend's home. He remembered it like it had happened this morning, as opposing to months and months ago. He remembered that it was the first time he had seen one of the infected. It had attacked him in a frenzy. What was no par for the second course of the time seemed like a novel way to perish. He had narrowly avoided the thing, using his friend's house keys to lock the creature inside the empty house. Ben had been for the first time, but not the last. Luckily, he had managed to survive that encounter, coming out with nothing but a small scratch from the infected creature's hooves. "There it is." The entity's voice broke through Ben's memory. But you're not. You're alive. You're the entity's voice trailed off, leaving Ben to complete the train of thought for himself. Ben had been facing the elements and the infected creatures for months now, and he had not so much as a fever, but there was no way that the entity could know any of that. Even Willow and her agent, as the Silverpaw, didn't know the details of Ben's adventures before he had come to them, and Willow was proud of saying that she had eyes and ears all over the island. To the lower-ranking Silverpaw agent, as that she could harangue you into listening to her through though perhaps she wasn't the only one. As Ben thought back over his journeys, he remembered every time that he had left a pair of eyes on him from a distance, a horrible red orb floating just out of reach, watching him without him knowing. The entity nodded its head slowly, and Ben came to a realization that he was being guided to an upturning smile to the entity's face, making him look all more unsettling. Don't you see, you're immune to the infection. You have much potential to do things beyond your understanding. Ben argued himself to wake up. To no unveil, the nightmare continued. He had no desire to join the man who came to people in their dreams and whispered wickedness into their ears. All Ben wanted was for things to go back to normal, but truthfully he wasn't quite sure what that would even look like anymore. I can help you. I can help you see your friends again, the entity said, waving his white glove hand in the air. A half-dozen figures began to glide forth from the shadows, lining up in front of the Inquisitus one as he presented them to Ben. His face pulled up at the corners by a smile with an angular fish. Ben would recognize the brown snout and blue police uniform of Officer Doggy anywhere. Even in a dream, he had lost the canine officer in the forest. They had managed to drive from the police station to the art gallery, fighting off the infected all the way. But after they made it their way into the forest, the main city of the Hill, Officer Doggy had simply disappeared, literally overnight. Ben had always hoped that he had gotten somewhere safe. The next figure revealed himself as Badgie. His right arm glowed a bright green color, holding his old radioactive container. The glow from his arm and the container shone a light on the other figures. Ollie, Billy, and Sally Squirrel. Ben's eyes widened as he took her in. Those same dark eyes, pink nose, and ever-twitching ears. Sally was a friend of Mr. P's, the voice on the other end of the Officer Doggy's radio. She had been hiding from the infected creatures in the basement of the school. When Ben had been tasked with rescuing her, and together they had fought their way out of the building, the two had made it to the downtown metro station, but that wasn't where they had been overtaken, overwhelmed, and cornered by a swarm of the massive mutated monsters. Sally had given herself up to the creatures to keep them at bay, attempting to fend off a veritable horde of monsters. With nothing but an old crossbow and a handful of carrots. The last time he had seen her had been from the back of the subway train car, shrinking into the distance against a sea of monsters. If she had not been so brave, Ben's journey might have become much more sudden and grisly end. I can help you see them all again, the entity repeated. You are strong, resilient, and talented warriors. There is much you can do for me in return. Ben considered the offer for a moment, mulling it over in his head. On one hand, he very badly wanted to know what happened to his friends. The last time he had seen Sally Squirrel and Officer Doggy had been in less than ideal situations, and Ben had not realized how much he missed them both until they trained on Ben with dangerous intent. I have but one thing to leave you with. Stay out of my business, the entity giant form barked. If you continue to follow your current path, you will live to regret it. With that, the entity was gone without so much as a trace, leaving Ben alone to the mauling by his former friends. The creature that used to be Badgie reached out for Ben, its green glowing arm grabbing him by the shoulder roughly. Ben screamed, eyes flying open as he was suddenly jolted awake from his dream. Whoa, Badgie cried out, yanking his arm back from its place on Ben's shoulder. He had been trying to jostle the poor kid awake for a while now, and even Billy and Ollie had woken from their exhaustion-fueled bout of shut-eye. You okay? Ben scanned the train for any signs of the Inquisitus one, and then once more for any signs of Officer Doggy or Sally, but he came up empty-handed on both fronts. Ben could not gauge how long he had been asleep, but judging by the way that the lights on the train had turned off, the subway car had long since come to a stop. They were at the metro station closet to the safe place, meaning that Willow would be waiting for them, likely not with an abundance of patience or the leader of the Silver Pod, no doubt, had an insane and dangerous task for Ben and his friends. Maybe it was one for the best that Ben had gotten as much sleep as he could, no matter how relentless it might have been. "I'm fine," Ben muttered, finally trying to convince his friends as well as himself. He brushed off their concerned looks with a wave of his hand. "Just had a bad dream, that's all." And that's the end of chapter 2. So, friends, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow us on social media, Funky Play Bros, Funky Play Brothers. Support our vlog at cashapp, $funkyplaybrothers. Thank you for watching. Bye. Next week is chapter 3.